I was right in the middle of a perfect, golden moment at Haven's Pantry. The warmth of the ovens felt like a hug, and the air was thick with the scent of toasted pecans, cinnamon, and caramelizing sugar. This kitchen, with its massive copper pots and well-worn wooden cutting boards, was my true sanctuary and the complete heart of the company my father, Julian, had founded. I was testing a new pecan brittle recipe, and I had gathered my small team of loyal, hard-working staff. The people who had been here since I was a child, around a large steel table. We were more than just a company, we were a family. I looked at Mrs. Gable, who was tasting a sample. Her eyes, usually so kind, lit up with approval. This feeling, the simple, shared pride in our honest, high-quality product, was exactly what Dad had taught us the business was truly about. I wore my favorite, comfortable apron, and my hands were happily dusted with flour and sugar. The atmosphere was completely safe, familiar, and filled with easy, warm laughter. I was so completely immersed in the joy of creating something pure and good that I never saw the cold, sharp corporate threat approaching the door, ready to completely shatter my entire world. The moment of perfect, quiet happiness shattered instantly, cutting the laughter short like a dropped knife. My sister, Seraphina, walked into the kitchen, and her presence was like a sudden, terrible Arctic blast of cold air. She was a complete visual contradiction to our cozy, warm, and comfortable scene. While I wore a simple cotton apron, Seraphina was completely encased in a sharp, expensive dark corporate suit, a cold dark gray color, with stilettos that clicked loudly and ominously on the stone floor, announcing her terrible arrival. Her face was set in a tight, judgmental frown. She didn't offer a simple hello to the staff. She looked at them with thinly veiled disgust, as if they were simple, uneducated peasants wasting valuable time. She didn't acknowledge the hard work. Instead, she checked her expensive, diamond-encrusted watch and announced, her voice cold and cutting, "You're all running 15 minutes late. This tasting session is completely unnecessary, and a complete waste of valuable time." The simple warmth and simple joy were immediately sucked out of the room, replaced by a cold, tense silence that made everyone, especially me, feel suddenly small, unimportant, and completely targeted. Seraphina wasted absolutely no time. She immediately announced an urgent board meeting, demanding that everyone drop what they were doing and meet her immediately in the main office. The board was only 3 people, me, Seraphina, and our Uncle Arthur, who held a small, 5% share. We sat down at the large, cold, dark oak table. Seraphina immediately took the lead, completely bypassing me. She dramatically pushed a thick, official folder across the table toward a nervous-looking Uncle Arthur. She spoke in a slick, rehearsed corporate voice about the huge offer of a lifetime from a massive, greedy corporation called Global Fair. She then started detailing immediate, drastic cost-cutting measures. Cheap industrial ingredients, immediate mass layoffs, and total automation to replace the hands of our loyal workers. She insisted this was the only way to make the business truly profitable and worth selling at a premium. Her entire speech was completely cold and full of dollar signs, completely ignoring the integrity, the community, and the quality that our father had poured his entire life into building. I could not simply sit there and let her completely destroy my father's entire life work. I slammed my hand down hard on the table, making the thick oak wood shake. My voice was loud and shaky, filled with righteous, powerful anger. "We can't do this, Seraphina," I passionately argued, looking straight at Uncle Arthur, pleading for him to see the terrible truth. Our father, Dad, built this entire business on quality and community. He never, ever compromised on the ingredients. If we start replacing our local organic honey with cheap, toxic corn syrup, we will completely betray his entire legacy. I looked at my sister, begging her to remember who we were as a family. This is not just about simple profit. It's about our reputation, our honesty, and our complete trust with our customers. Seraphina simply rolled her eyes in bored disgust at my passion. "You are completely emotional and ridiculously romantic, Audrey," she sneered, her voice dripping with cold condescension. "This is not a simple, soft charity. It's a huge, valuable business. And your father was simply too soft and too sentimental to ever make it truly big and rich." My simple, honest passion, and my sincere pleas for integrity were completely ignored. Only the promise of quick, massive money mattered. Uncle Arthur, who was a kind man but was completely swayed by Seraphina's huge, polished promises of immediate, sudden wealth, finally spoke up. He looked completely uncomfortable, shamefully avoiding my direct gaze. "Audrey dear," he mumbled sadly, clutching the folder tightly, "Seraphina has done the hard math. The global fair money is a complete safety net for all of us. This is a huge, sensible, and necessary financial opportunity." With those few, terrible, weak words, he completely and officially sided with Seraphina. We were the only 3 board members, so the final vote passed immediately, 2 votes to 1. My sister immediately had complete, cold control of Haven's Pantry. I was stunned into complete, painful silence. I had gone from co-CEO of my father's legacy to being completely voted out of the company I loved. The betrayal was shocking, absolute, and came from the very people who were supposed to be my family. I felt the powerful sting of utter defeat. The humiliation was immediate, public, and absolute. Within 5 minutes of the crushing vote, Seraphina had 2 huge, stern security guards waiting for me by the office door. She made them stand there as she gathered my meager personal belongings. She then ordered them to escort me out of the building. I walked slowly past the open kitchen, past Mrs. Gable and all the other familiar, kind employees. Their faces were full of shock, confusion, and deep sympathy, and they whispered quietly as I walked by. I couldn't look any of them in the eyes. I felt completely ashamed and completely defeated, as if I had failed every single one of them. I wanted desperately to stop and explain the terrible truth, but the stone-faced guards were rushing me roughly toward the front door. As I reached the parking lot, I turned back quickly, just as Seraphina was closing the door to the office, her briefcase held tightly like a shield. She turned and gave me one last, cold, triumphant smirk. It was a look of pure, utter victory and cold disdain. That final, cruel smirk was the sharpest knife in my back. It was the terrible moment I realized she didn't just want the business. She wanted to completely destroy me and publicly rub my total failure in my face. I immediately threw myself into the small, old, dented car that my father had given me years ago and just sat there, shaking violently and uncontrollably. I watched the huge, stern security guard stand by the front door, making absolutely sure I did not try to re-enter the building. The keys to the business were gone. The passwords were gone. My entire life, my career, and my sense of purpose were completely gone. I felt the powerful, crushing weight of the loss settle over me like a heavy, cold stone. This was not just a simple job. It was my father's life work, his entire legacy, his entire spirit, and the one place where I felt I truly belonged. The betrayal by Seraphina and Uncle Arthur felt like a physical, sharp pain in my chest. I finally completely broke down, sobbing loudly and uncontrollably against the steering wheel. The future looked utterly bleak and terrifyingly empty. I had poured my entire heart and soul into Haven's Pantry. Now I had no savings, no other job skills, and no business. I sat there crying until the last light of the sunset was completely gone, feeling utterly alone and completely defeated, determined that this feeling could not last forever. Seraphina immediately implemented her corporate plan without a single shred of human compassion. Her plan to sell the business quickly to Global Fair was immediately put into cold, cruel action. The very next day, a huge flood of cold formal termination notices went out to our most loyal longtime employees. Mrs. Gable, who had personally worked in the kitchen for over 20 years and was like a second mother to me, was immediately fired without so much as a proper thank you or a handshake. The dozens of hard-working people who had been like a second family to me were simply discarded like old cheap trash. The business that my father had built on simple love, honesty, and community was being immediately stripped bare by my own sister's cold, calculating greed. I received frantic, heartbreaking calls from the now-fired employees. They were scared, confused, and felt completely betrayed by the company they had trusted. Their pain was raw and completely genuine, and it only solidified my quiet resolve to fight back. But right now I was still powerless and alone. Feeling completely lost, heartbroken, and deeply ashamed, I immediately went to visit my mother. I needed comfort, but more importantly, I needed to talk to the one person who truly remembered our father's true heart and honest values. My mother was sitting quietly in her small garden, completely weeping. She looked devastatingly broken and fragile. "Your sister has completely fractured our family, Audrey," she whispered, her voice full of sorrow and disappointment. She felt completely powerless to intervene or stop Seraphina's rampage. Seraphina had completely cut her off emotionally and financially. My mother only had a small apartment and a small, fixed income, and she completely relied on the small dividends from the business. She feared speaking out because Seraphina had threatened to immediately cut off her money if she complained about anything. The pain of the family fracturing was now worse than the loss of the business itself. Seraphina was not just stealing a company. She was tearing our entire family apart with her massive, consuming, terrible greed. I looked at my mother, who was usually so strong, now completely broken, and I vowed that Seraphina would absolutely pay for every single tear she had caused. I knew I could not fight a huge corporate monster like Global Fair completely alone. I immediately started trying to rally support from the other small local business owners in our town, hoping for some kind of community intervention. I went to the farmers market, the local small bakery, and the local artisan coffee shop. I told them exactly what Seraphina was doing, the plan to sell out, the ruthless cold layoffs, and the plan to use cheap industrial ingredients. They were all completely sympathetic and completely understood the danger of a huge, greedy corporation taking over the local market. They looked at me sadly, shaking their heads slowly. "We wish we could help you, Audrey," the baker told me honestly, his voice full of regret. "But we are all too small and too fragile. We can't afford to fight a powerful company like Global Fair. We have our own families to protect from their aggression." Their simple kindness was a small comfort, but their complete inability to help was a painful reality check. I was completely on my own in this fight against a corporate giant. I realized I had to be smarter than them, not just stronger. My absolute worst fears about the future of the business were quickly and publicly confirmed. Through a simple cold press release, I learned that Seraphina was immediately replacing all of our signature, authentic local ingredients with cheap, mass-produced industrial alternatives. Our famed pecan brittle, which used expensive local organic maple syrup, was now made with cheap, highly processed corn syrup. Our savory spice mixes, which used costly imported sea salt, were now made with cheap, chemical table salt. Seraphina was systematically destroying the product's entire soul and the strong 20-year reputation we had built on quality and trust. She was doing this cold-bloodedly to completely inflate the immediate profits for the quick sale to Global Fair. I felt sick to my stomach, physically repulsed by her actions. It wasn't just a betrayal of our father's memory. It was a pure, absolute fraud against every single one of our loyal paying customers. I knew this was illegal and morally wrong, but without any hard physical evidence from inside the building, I could not prove the true extent of the ingredient swap to a court. Just when I felt completely alone and utterly defeated, I received a small, urgent, secret message through an encrypted app. It was from Reese, a young loyal employee who had been one of the most brilliant lead bakers at Haven's Pantry. He was one of the few who had not been immediately fired because he was essential to the new, awful automation process. We quickly agreed to meet late at night in a quiet, dark, deserted park. Reese looked completely terrified and was constantly looking over his shoulder, paranoid that Seraphina's spies might be watching. He quickly and urgently confirmed my absolute worst fears about the quality sabotage. "It's terrible, Audrey," he whispered urgently, his voice tight with frustration. "Seraphina has signed new contracts with cheap, terrible suppliers. The product quality is so low, we can barely look at it. It's an insult to your father's memory and an insult to food itself." Reese, who was completely dedicated to the purity of the food, offered immediately to become my inside man. He risked his own job to quietly document the change in suppliers, the new cheap contracts, and the complete destruction of the old precious recipes. His complete loyalty to the soul of the business, not to Seraphina's money, gave me a massive, new surge of quiet, powerful hope. Seraphina was not only destroying the business, she was strategically trying to financially suffocate me and my mother into submission. She quickly exercised her new, massive power and immediately froze me out of all company accounts. She canceled my signature authority on the simple business accounts. Worse, she used a terrible, obscure legal technical loophole to lock me completely out of the small family trust that Dad had established years ago for our security. This trust was meant to cover my last college loan payment and my mother's unexpected medical expenses. Now that money, our safety net, was completely inaccessible to me. She was actively tightening her massive financial stranglehold, ensuring I could not afford to hire a good lawyer, pay my rent, or fight back effectively in court. She wanted me to be completely bankrupt, completely desperate, and forced to completely surrender. I had to sell my own small jewelry collection and a few family heirlooms just to pay the simple rent that month. The financial pressure was a constant, powerful reminder of her cold, systematic cruelty. The final, most humiliating and aggressive move in Seraphina's financial attack came a week later. I received a thick, official letter from her powerful corporate lawyer. It was a ridiculously lowball offer to immediately buy my remaining minority shares in the stolen company. The price offered was completely insulting, barely a tenth of what the shares were truly worth on paper. The letter was polite on the surface, but it contained a sharp, very clear veiled threat. It strongly suggested that if I completely refused the low offer, the upcoming sale to Global Fair would completely destroy my share value, leaving me with absolutely nothing in the end. It was a clear bullying tactic. Take the small payout now, or risk losing everything forever and being ruined. Seraphina was trying to force me into a total, painful surrender, thinking I was too tired, too poor, and too utterly defeated to fight her powerful legal team any longer. The threat felt like a cold, desperate hand tightening around my throat. I stood completely frozen in my small, empty apartment kitchen, staring blankly at the lowball offer for my life's work. I felt absolutely defeated, completely cornered, and utterly alone. The threat felt too powerful, and the cold financial pressure was completely suffocating. This was my absolute lowest point. I moved slowly to the small, dusty bookshelf and picked up an old, framed family photo. It was a picture of my father, Julian, smiling proudly next to a massive sack of premium pecans, with a much younger Seraphina, and me sitting happily on his strong knees. I looked at his kind, honest eyes that saw the good in everything. I immediately felt like I had completely failed my father. I had failed to protect his beautiful legacy, his business, and the wonderful people he cared about. I closed my eyes tightly, feeling the terrible, physical weight of everything crashing down on me. I desperately wanted to give up, take the small, insulting money, and simply walk away from the pain. But then, I remembered Seraphina's cold, cruel smirk, and the desperate, hot anger returned, forging a new, stronger determination. I knew I couldn't surrender now. As I held the old framed family photo, my mind suddenly flashed back to a small, insignificant memory, a tiny, unimportant detail from years ago. I remembered my father, sitting on the couch, laughing loudly and completely confused as he tried desperately to get his new streaming service, Netflix, to work. He was completely overwhelmed by the multitude of complicated passwords. He decided right then to create one single, easy, shared family email account for all his online signups, like streaming services, magazine subscriptions, and junk mail. He called it havenfamily@gmail.com. He had made me solemnly promise to never use it for anything truly important, only for simple junk mail and pointless signups. I remembered him showing me the password, making me memorize it by relating it to his favorite recipe. The small, stupid memory hit me hard and suddenly, sparking a massive idea. Wait a minute. If he used that simple account for everything unimportant, what if Seraphina, in her arrogance, had also used it for some small, secret communication? The idea was crazy, almost impossible, but it was the only glimmer of hope I had left. The shared email was the only place I might find a secret she had completely forgotten about, a flaw in her perfect, cold plan. My hands were shaking violently with fear and excitement as I sat down at my laptop. I slowly typed in the old, familiar email address, havenfamily@gmail.com. I carefully typed the password, which was a ridiculously simple combination of Dad's birthday and his favorite spice blend. It worked. I was instantly logged into the shared family account. I held my breath, waiting nervously for the inbox to load. The inbox was completely cluttered and frustrating, exactly as Dad had intended. Hundreds of spam emails, old subscription renewal notices, and random online order receipts from years ago. I started scrolling desperately through the endless clutter, searching frantically for any sign of Seraphina's name, or the words global fair. Hours passed slowly, and my initial, bright, desperate hope slowly began to wane. It was just a junk email account, exactly as I should have expected. I was ready to give up completely, convinced this was just a stupid waste of my entire time, and that I had failed again to find the weapon I needed. I decided to try one last, desperate search query. I searched the simple corporate keyword acquisition. Finally, buried deep under a huge, digital mountain of old supermarket coupons and newsletters, I saw it. It was an email chain, dated over 3 years ago, long before our father had even become seriously ill. The subject line was simply partnership discussion. The chain was between Seraphina and the lead corporate lawyer for Global Fair. My heart leaped and pounded in my chest. I quickly clicked it open. The emails outlined the entire, massive, deceitful plan. Seraphina was discussing a pre-planned takeover and how they would manage my father's eventual soft opposition to selling the company. She was coldly planning to completely betray our father, even while he was still alive and running the company. It was the absolute, undeniable, incriminating email I had been desperately searching for, the final, crucial piece of evidence. It was the complete, cold proof that this was not a new business decision. It was a premeditated, cruel, years-long plot to steal the business and destroy my father's legacy for pure profit. The evidence was completely shocking, devastating, and absolutely undeniable, but I knew I could not act alone. I immediately called Reese, my brave inside man, and my mother. I quickly showed them the email from 3 years ago. The complete depth of Seraphina's cold, calculated betrayal completely silenced them both in disbelief. My mother started crying softly, but this time, they were tears of pure, powerful fury and shame, not sorrow. She has been plotting this entire thing since your father was still alive, Audrey, my mother whispered, clutching the printed email tightly. The shared, righteous shock immediately solidified our resolve. We quickly formed a small, powerful, completely secret alliance against Seraphina. We would use this email as the single, powerful weapon to completely expose her lies and save Haven's Pantry from her greedy hands. We knew the fight would be public, dangerous, and completely brutal, but now we had the undeniable, irrefutable truth on our side, and that was more powerful than any corporate army. With the smoking gun email in our possession, Reese immediately became our true, brave eyes and ears inside the stolen company. He was completely dedicated, fearless, and motivated by pure loyalty. He started meticulously and systematically gathering concrete evidence of Seraphina's financial crimes and the huge, unethical quality changes. Reese quickly photographed the new, cheap supplier contracts that Seraphina had signed. He expertly compared the old sacred recipes with the terrible new chemical substitutes being used. He even managed to quietly leak the first few financial malfeasance reports that clearly showed Seraphina was intentionally undervaluing assets to make the sale look better for herself and worse for the small shareholders. Reese risked his high-paying job every single day, working late into the night, but his deep loyalty to my father's original, good product was stronger than his fear of Seraphina's powerful corporate anger. Every single file he sent me was another heavy, sharp nail in Seraphina's cold, greedy coffin. My mother, now completely focused on helping me, suddenly remembered a small, important detail about my father. Your father was always deeply suspicious of Seraphina's sharp, cold ambition, Audrey, she admitted sadly, wiping her eyes. She recalled a late-night conversation where Dad mentioned securing the company's future against any kind of internal threat. She immediately rushed to the dark, dusty attic and returned with an old, forgotten leather box. Inside, she found a cryptic, small note and a business card. The note referred to a secret will he had drawn up years ago with a very specific, powerful clause. This will, my mother remembered, included a powerful, rare fraud clause. This clause clearly stated that if any board member was found to have acted with malicious intent to steal the company or fraudulently sell it, their shares would be immediately voided, and they would be completely removed from the business forever. The hidden will was the final, absolute legal key to our complete victory and Seraphina's total destruction. We immediately tracked down the retired lawyer mentioned on the business card, Mr. Sterling. He was old and lived in a quiet town far away, but he instantly remembered my father and his specific concerns. We drove quickly to meet him in his small, dusty, completely old-fashioned office. I showed him the 3-year-old email and told him about Seraphina's entire, cruel conspiracy. Mr. Sterling immediately looked closely at the secret will and confirmed its absolute power. He explained, his voice raspy with age, that the fraud clause was completely legal, highly effective, and enforceable in court. He explained that if we could absolutely prove malicious intent, which the 3-year-old email and Reese's financial documents clearly did, the entire sale would be instantly voided, and Seraphina would lose every single thing she had stolen. Mr. Sterling, who was completely disgusted by Seraphina's cold-hearted actions, immediately agreed to come out of retirement, at no cost, just to help us fight this massive battle in court. The final, high-stakes shareholder meeting was exactly 1 week away. This was the date where the final sale would be officially signed and sealed forever. We all sat together in my small apartment, me, my mother, Reese, and Mr. Sterling, to finalize our entire strategy. We decided on a complete, public ambush. The only way to completely destroy her reputation. We would not try to file a small, private injunction beforehand. We would let Seraphina give her entire, triumphant, arrogant speech. We would let her pick up the golden pen to sign the final contract, completely confident in her final victory. Then, and only then, would we unleash the full, devastating power of our evidence. We would let her completely hang herself with her own cold, complete arrogance. The plan was incredibly risky, high stakes, and completely public, but it was the only way to publicly redeem our father's legacy and save the reputation of Haven's Pantry. The final week flew by in a blur of intense, careful, and secret preparation. We had to create a presentation that was completely undeniable and impossible to simply talk away with legal jargon. Reese provided high-quality photos and official reports of the cheap, toxic, chemical ingredient swap, contrasting them sharply with our old, pure ingredients. My mother provided the signed, original secret will and the lawyer's testimony. And I, the quiet, underestimated sister, had the ultimate, devastating weapon. The devastating 3-year-old email detailing the entire conspiracy. We compiled everything into a powerful, clear, and emotionally charged presentation deck. We practiced the timing perfectly. Mr. Sterling, the retired lawyer, coached me on how to keep my voice strong, level, and completely steady, no matter what Seraphina said or did in the courtroom. We knew we only had one single public chance to completely expose her, and we had to make it absolutely count. The day of the shareholder meeting felt heavy and intimidating. The massive ballroom was filled with nervous, small shareholders, a few hidden reporters, and the cold-faced corporate lawyers from Global Fair. Seraphina stood proudly on the stage, completely radiant and completely triumphant in an expensive new tailor-made suit. She gave a long, confident, and completely dishonest speech about progress and modernizing Haven's Pantry. She spoke about the huge financial rewards for everyone who voted for the quick sale. The Global Fair lawyers stood beside her like proud bodyguards, looking bored and completely certain of their imminent victory. Seraphina completely ignored me sitting quietly in the back row. She was completely sure I was too poor, too defeated, and too broken to even show up to witness my own final defeat. I looked at her, my hands shaking slightly, but my heart was completely cold, steady, and ready for the ambush. The time for the reckoning was finally, truly here. The long, boring speeches finally ended. The final sale contract, hundreds of pages thick, was dramatically placed on the table in front of Seraphina. The corporate lawyer handed her an expensive, golden pen. She looked around the entire room, her face completely fixed in a proud, victorious glance that stopped briefly on me. It was a look of cold, absolute triumph, utter pity, and contempt. She smirked, completely confident in her final, complete victory. She had won everything. The silence in the room was electric and absolute as everyone waited for the final signature. I watched her hand move slowly, dramatically toward the signature line, ready to completely sign away my father's entire soul and the legacy of our company. This was my final, absolute moment to act, and I knew I could not let her sign that final, terrible paper. I immediately stood up quickly. My legs felt shaky, but my voice was completely steady and loud enough to fill the entire room, cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. Before you sign away our father's soul, Seraphina, and the heart of this entire company, there's something you all urgently need to hear, I announced clearly. Seraphina froze instantly, the golden pen hovering just inches above the paper. Her triumphant, smug face immediately twisted into pure, desperate rage and confusion. She tried to yell at me to sit down and be quiet, but I was already holding up the small microphone. I immediately played the audio recording of the damning email being read out loud. The corporate lawyer's voice, followed by Seraphina's cold, calculating reply from 3 years ago, filled the entire ballroom, detailing the entire plot to fraudulently seize control of the company. The words "manage his soft opposition" echoed loudly. Chaos instantly erupted in the ballroom. People were shouting loudly, gasping, and rushing out of their chairs to get closer. Seraphina's face went from pure, smug triumph to sheer, absolute panic. She rushed to the sound system, scrambling desperately to completely shut off the recording. She was screaming loud denials, but her voice was completely shaky and completely defeated. The Global Fair lawyers immediately huddled together, whispering urgently into their phones. They knew that premeditated fraud would completely void their contract and ruin their professional reputation. Seraphina was completely exposed as a cold, calculating liar and a thief in front of everyone who mattered in the corporate world. Her entire world was completely and utterly collapsing, right in front of the dozens of flashing cameras and all the horrified shareholders. I immediately took the stage, completely ignoring Seraphina's frantic, meaningless screaming. I unleashed the full, massive presentation. On the huge screen, I displayed the photos of the cheap, toxic, chemical ingredients, the leaked financial records proving the massive asset undervaluation and her embezzlement, and the original, signed secret will with the powerful fraud clause. Mr. Sterling immediately stood up and addressed the shareholders, confirming the will's complete validity and enforceability. The evidence was overwhelming, impossible to deny, and totally devastating. The Global Fair representatives immediately stood up, their faces pale with shock and disgust, and announced they were withdrawing their offer immediately. They wanted nothing to do with a complete criminal case. Uncle Arthur, who had been completely silent and ashamed, immediately collapsed in shame in his chair, realizing his terrible mistake. Seraphina was left completely isolated, utterly exposed, and financially destroyed by her own sister. The room slowly cleared, leaving only a few quiet, supportive staff and the lawyers. I was immediately reinstated as CEO by a unanimous vote from the remaining loyal shareholders. My first and most important act was to immediately tear up the termination notices that Seraphina had issued and hug Mrs. Gable. Reese was promoted immediately to head of production. Later, 1 year later, the business was completely thriving. We had launched a successful new, powerful line of products called Founder's Honor that symbolized our commitment to quality. I received a final letter. Seraphina was being sued for massive fraud by her former corporate partners and had completely vanished from the entire corporate world in disgrace. She had lost everything. I looked up at the old, framed portrait of my father hanging proudly in the newly renovated office. I smiled sadly, my heart full of victory and peace. "She tried to steal his business, Dad," I whispered quietly. "But she forgot the most important ingredient he ever gave us, our integrity. And that's one single, powerful thing she could never counterfeit." The business and the family was finally safe and whole again, stronger than ever.